Give us this day, give us this day.
Imagine you're a NASA scientist in the 1960s, working on calculations for satellite trajectories and space missions. You're running the numbers, checking orbital mechanics, mapping planetary positions across thousands of years, and then you find it a gap. 24 hours that simply don't add up. A missing day in the astronomical record that has no scientific explanation. Your calculations are correct, your methodology is sound, but according to the math, somewhere in ancient history, time itself seemed to pause. Now imagine opening the Bible and reading about a day when Joshua commanded the sun to stand still, and it obeyed. Coincidence? Scientific impossibility? Or something that challenges everything we think we know about the boundaries between faith and empirical evidence? What you're about to discover isn't folklore or religious mythology, it's a documented investigation that has sparked decades of debate among scientists, theologians, and skeptics alike. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you'll understand why the story refuses to die, why it keeps resurfacing in scientific circles, and what it might mean for how we understand both scripture and the cosmos. Let me take you back to a moment that would become one of the most controversial discoveries in the intersection of faith and science. The story begins not in ancient Israel, but in 20th century America, in the high-stakes world of the space race. It's the 1960s, and NASA is pushing the boundaries of human achievement, preparing to put a man on the moon. But space travel isn't just about rockets and courage, it requires precision calculations of a level humanity had never attempted before. Engineers need to know exactly where every celestial body will be, not just today, but centuries into the past and future. Satellite trajectories, orbital mechanics, gravitational fields, all of it depends on understanding the precise positions of the sun, moon, and planets across vast stretches of time. This is where our story takes its first mysterious turn. According to accounts that began circulating in Christian circles in the late 1960s and early 1970s, NASA scientists were running these astronomical calculations when they encountered something that couldn't exist: a discrepancy in the data. The computers, which were supposed to be infallible in their mathematical precision, were showing that when you calculated backward through history, the numbers didn't match up perfectly. There appeared to be missing time, roughly 24 hours that couldn't be accounted for in the astronomical record. For scientists whose entire mission depended on precision down to the millisecond, this was more than puzzling, it was potentially catastrophic. Now, here's where the story becomes truly fascinating. According to the circulating account, one of the team members was a devout Christian. When confronted with this missing day in the calculations, he remembered something from his Bible study. He recalled the story from the book of Joshua, chapter 10, where during a crucial battle, Joshua prayed for more daylight and God made the sun stand still. Could it be possible, this engineer wondered, that this ancient biblical account was actually referring to this same missing time that NASA's computers were detecting? The idea seemed absurd on its face, using a religious text to solve a problem in orbital mechanics. But as the story spread, it captured imaginations around the world. Let's examine what the Bible actually says, because the details matter here. In Joshua chapter 10, the Israelites are fighting a coalition of 5 Amorite kings who have attacked the city of Gibeon, Israel's ally. Joshua leads his army on an all-night march to surprise the enemy at dawn. The battle is going well, but Joshua realizes they won't be able to complete the victory before nightfall. And in ancient warfare, darkness meant the enemy could escape and regroup. So Joshua does something unprecedented. He speaks directly to the sun and moon, commanding them in the name of God. He says, "Sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon, over the valley of Ajalon." And according to the text, the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day. The passage explicitly states that there has never been a day like it before or since, a day when the Lord listened to a human being and fought for Israel. This isn't a minor detail tucked away in an obscure verse. It's presented as a major miracle so significant that it's recorded not just in the biblical text, but also referenced in the book of Joshua, an ancient Hebrew text that's mentioned in the Bible but has been lost to history. The account is specific about timing, about location, about the battle context. It is not vague or metaphorical, it describes a literal stoppage of the sun's apparent movement across the sky, giving Joshua approximately 24 additional hours to secure victory. For 3,000 years, skeptics have dismissed this as either pure mythology or perhaps a poetic way of describing a very long day. But then came the NASA story. and suddenly this ancient account was being discussed in the context of modern space calculations. The story gained enormous traction, particularly in evangelical Christian communities. Here was proof, they said, that science was validating the Bible. NASA, the pinnacle of scientific achievement and technological precision, had supposedly stumbled upon evidence that a biblical miracle actually occurred. Books were written, sermons were preached, testimonies were shared. People who had questioned whether biblical miracles could be real in a scientific age suddenly had what seemed like empirical validation. The story was too perfect, too compelling, too powerful to ignore. But here's the critical question we have to ask: was it true? Because as this story spread like wildfire through churches and Christian publications, another group was paying attention: the scientists and fact-checkers, who wanted to verify these extraordinary claims. And that's when things got complicated. NASA began receiving inquiries about this missing day calculation. Reporters wanted confirmation. Scientists wanted to see the data. Skeptics wanted to debunk what they saw as religious propaganda masquerading as scientific discovery. What NASA said in response would become just as controversial as the original story, and it would launch a debate that continues to this day. Some people claimed NASA confirmed the story, but then suppressed it under pressure from secular scientists. Others said NASA categorically denied the entire thing ever happened. Still others suggested there might be a kernel of truth buried somewhere in the middle, that perhaps some calculation discrepancy existed, but had been misinterpreted or exaggerated as it spread through informal networks. The question became not just whether the sun stood still for Joshua, but whether we could even trust the story about NASA discovering it. To understand what really happened, we need to dig deeper into both the science and the story's origins. Let us start with the scientific possibility: could modern astronomers actually detect a missing day by calculating backward through history? The answer is more nuanced than you might think. Astronomers can indeed calculate planetary positions with remarkable accuracy going back thousands of years. They use sophisticated mathematical models based on gravitational physics, orbital mechanics, and historical observations recorded by ancient astronomers from Babylon, Egypt, China, and other civilizations. These calculations allow us to predict eclipses, planetary alignments, and other celestial events with precision that would have seemed like magic to our ancestors. But here is the crucial detail that often gets lost in the retelling of the NASA story: these calculations depend on known physics and continuous natural processes. If the sun actually stopped moving relative to Earth, or more accurately, if Earth stopped rotating, this wouldn't just create a calculation discrepancy. It would represent a complete suspension of the laws of physics as we understand them. The energy required to stop Earth's rotation would be unimaginable. The immediate consequences would be catastrophic tsunamis, earthquakes, atmospheric disruption on a scale that would reshape the entire planet. And then there is the question of how rotation would resume without leaving geological evidence of such a cataclysmic event. From a purely naturalistic scientific perspective, Joshua's long day isn't just unlikely, it is physically impossible without divine intervention that operates outside natural law. This is where the investigation becomes truly fascinating, because we're not just asking whether something happened, but what kind of evidence we should expect to find. If God supernaturally intervened to stop the sun's apparent motion, while protecting Earth from the physical consequences that would normally result, then we're talking about a miracle that by definition transcends natural law. And here's the paradox: how do you use natural science to detect supernatural intervention? It's like trying to measure love with a ruler or weigh hope on a scale. The tools might be precise, but they're not designed for that kind of measurement. This doesn't make the question meaningless, but it does mean we need to be very careful about what kind of evidence we're actually looking for, and what conclusions we can legitimately draw. Now let's trace the story's origins, because this is where things get really interesting. The account of NASA discovering Joshua's missing day appears to have first gained widespread attention through a book published in 1974, called The Harmony of Science and Scripture by Harry Rimmer. Though similar stories had been circulating in Christian newsletters and word-of-mouth accounts for several years before that, the story typically involved a scientist at NASA or a related aerospace facility. Sometimes he was named Harold Hill. Sometimes the names varied who was a Christian and made the connection between the computer discrepancy and the biblical account. The details shifted depending on who was telling the story, but the core remained consistent. NASA's computers found missing time, and a Christian scientist recognized it from the Bible. Harold Hill, who became most associated with this story, was indeed a real person. He was president of a Curtiss engine company in Baltimore, which did contract work related to space programs. He was also a devout Christian who spoke at churches and Christian events. In various accounts, Hill claimed either to have witnessed the NASA discovery firsthand or to have heard about it from reliable sources within the space program. The problem is that when investigators tried to verify the specifics, which NASA center, which specific program, which scientists were involved, what dates this occurred, the details became frustratingly vague. NASA itself issued statements saying they had no record of any such discovery, and that their calculations don't work the way the story describes. But here's where we have to be fair to both sides of this debate. The absence of official confirmation doesn't necessarily mean nothing ever happened. Large organizations like NASA process enormous amounts of data, employ thousands of people, and not every observation or informal discussion gets documented in ways that create permanent institutional records. It's possible that some engineer or scientist noticed something unusual in calculations, mentioned it casually, and that observation got amplified and embellished as it passed through multiple retellings. It is also possible that what happened was much more mundane. Perhaps someone ran into a calculation error caused by a programming bug or data input mistake, and that mistake got mythologized into the story about discovering biblical truth. Or it's possible the entire thing was fabricated, either deliberately or through the kind of well-intentioned but unreliable storytelling that happens when people desperately want something to be true. What makes this story so persistent isn't just the NASA angle. It is that similar accounts have surfaced from other sources over the decades. Some pointed to the work of Yale astronomer Totten in the 1890s, who allegedly calculated backward and found evidence of Joshua's long day. Others reference Sir Edwin Ball, a British astronomer who supposedly confirmed the missing day. The pattern is always similar: a credible scientific figure, precise calculations, and results that seem to validate the biblical account. But when skeptics and fact-checkers investigate these claims, they consistently find the same problems: vague details, unverifiable sources, and a lack of documentation that would meet basic standards of scientific evidence. Yet believers counter that absence of proof isn't proof of absence, and that the scientific establishment might have reasons to suppress findings that support biblical narratives. Let's consider another angle that often gets overlooked in this debate: the ancient historical records themselves. The Bible isn't the only ancient text that describes unusual celestial events. Chinese astronomical records, which are remarkably detailed and go back thousands of years, describe various unusual phenomena. There are accounts from different cultures of extraordinarily long days or nights, of the sun standing still or moving backward. Supporters of the Joshua account point to these as corroborating evidence from independent sources. Critics respond that ancient people didn't have accurate timekeeping, that these accounts are either mythological or describe natural phenomena like eclipses or unusual atmospheric effects that were misunderstood. Both sides have legitimate points, and the debate often comes down to fundamental questions about how we evaluate ancient testimony and what we consider reliable evidence. There's also a fascinating mathematical detail that supporters of the story emphasize. They point out that the biblical account doesn't describe exactly 24 hours of stop time. Joshua chapter 10 says the sun stood still about a full day, and the Hebrew word translated as about suggests approximation. Later in the Bible, in 2 Kings chapter 20 and Isaiah chapter 38, there's another celestial miracle where the shadow on a sundial moves backward 10 degrees, roughly 40 minutes. Some interpreters add these together. Approximately 23 hours and 20 minutes from Joshua's long day, plus 40 minutes from the sundial miracle, equals exactly 24 hours. They argue this precision is evidence of authenticity if someone was making up the NASA story. Why include this complicating detail about it not being exactly 24 hours? Critics respond that this is retrofitting the evidence, adjusting the numbers to fit a predetermined conclusion. So where does this leave us? After examining the claims, the evidence, the scientific principles, and the historical records, what can we actually conclude about Joshua's long day and whether NASA discovered evidence of it? The honest answer is more complex than either die-hard believers or committed skeptics usually want to admit, and that complexity is actually where the most interesting insights emerge. Let's start with what we can say with reasonable confidence. The popular story about NASA computers discovering a missing day while calculating satellite trajectories told in a specific way. It usually appears with dramatic details about scientists frantically checking their calculations and a Christian engineer solving the mystery. Does not appear to be factually accurate in that form. NASA has consistently stated they have no record of such a discovery. No peer-reviewed scientific paper has documented this finding. No credible astronomical research has validated the specific claims made in the story. Does this mean the biblical account of Joshua's long day is false? That's a completely different question, and it's where we need to be very careful about logical precision. The lack of confirmation for the NASA story doesn't prove the biblical event didn't occur. It only proves that this particular modern story about discovering it may be unreliable. The two questions are related but distinct. The Joshua account stands or falls on its own merits, not on whether a 20th century aerospace story about it can be verified. This is crucial to understand because many believers invested emotional energy in the NASA story as proof of biblical truth, and when that story was questioned, they felt it undermined the Bible itself. But the Bible's credibility doesn't depend on modern scientific validation. Scripture makes claims based on ancient testimony and divine revelation, not on whether contemporary scientists can replicate or detect those events thousands of years later. Now here's where things get philosophically interesting. Could God have caused the sun to stand still for Joshua? If we're operating from a theistic worldview that accepts an omnipotent creator who established natural laws, then logically that creator would have the ability to suspend or supersede those laws. The question isn't whether it is scientifically possible within the framework of natural law. Miracles by definition transcend natural law. The question is whether we have sufficient reason to believe it actually happened. That comes down to how much credibility we assign to the biblical text as a historical source, which depends on broader questions about biblical reliability, the nature of divine inspiration, and how we interpret ancient literature. These aren't questions science alone can answer because they involve metaphysical and epistemological assumptions that precede scientific investigation. But let us push deeper into what this story, both the ancient biblical account and the modern NASA story, reveals about how we approach truth in an age of both faith and science. The reason the NASA story spread so rapidly through Christian communities is that it seemed to offer something very appealing: empirical, scientific validation of biblical claims. In a culture that often treats science as the ultimate arbiter of truth, having scientists confirm a biblical miracle felt like winning the cultural argument. It made faith intellectually respectable in a way that pure religious conviction sometimes struggles to achieve in secular contexts. But here's the uncomfortable question: why did we need that validation? Does the truth of biblical accounts depend on modern scientific confirmation? Or is there something insufficient about faith itself that makes us grasp for empirical proof? This isn't to criticize the desire for evidence. Intellectual honesty and careful investigation are virtues, not vices. The Bible itself repeatedly emphasizes the importance of testimony, evidence, and reasonable faith. The Apostle Paul wrote that if Christ wasn't literally, physically raised from the dead, then Christian faith is worthless. He was making an evidential claim about a historical event. Christianity has never been about blind faith disconnected from reality. But there is a difference between faith informed by evidence and faith that requires scientific validation to be credible. The NASA story's appeal revealed something about modern Christian anxiety, a fear that without scientific backing, biblical claims won't be taken seriously. That fear is understandable given our cultural moment, but it also might indicate a subtle shift in where we're locating the foundation of faith. Let's consider what we actually know with historical confidence. The book of Joshua was written thousands of years ago and describes events from approximately 1400 BCE. It presents itself as historical narrative, not poetry or mythology. The text is specific about names, places, and events in ways that historical writing tends to be. Archaeological discoveries have confirmed many details about the time period, including the existence of cities mentioned, the general accuracy of cultural descriptions, and the historical plausibility of the military campaigns described. This doesn't prove every detail is accurate, but it does establish that we're dealing with ancient literature rooted in real historical contexts, not pure fiction. The Joshua account has been part of the biblical canon accepted by Jewish and Christian communities for millennia. Millions of people across history have believed this event occurred exactly as described. Now, historical confidence isn't the same as certainty. We can't observe the past directly. We depend on testimony, archaeological evidence, and reasoned inference. For events that involve supernatural intervention, we're necessarily moving beyond what purely naturalistic historical methodology can adjudicate. A naturalistic historian, operating from the assumption that miracles don't occur, would automatically reject the Joshua account regardless of how well documented it was. simply because the event described is impossible within a naturalistic framework. A historian open to theistic explanations might evaluate the same evidence differently. This isn't about one side being more rational or scientific. It is about differing metaphysical assumptions that shape how we interpret evidence. Here's what I find most significant about this entire investigation. Whether or not the NASA story is accurate, whether or not we can scientifically detect Joshua's long day, the fact remains that this event was significant enough that ancient people recorded it, preserved it, and considered it one of the most important moments in their history. The text says there has never been a day like it before or since. This was understood as unique, unprecedented, miraculous. The question we each have to answer is what we do with that testimony. Do we dismiss it as primitive superstition? Do we accept it as accurate historical reporting of a divine miracle? Do we interpret it as poetic or metaphorical language describing something else entirely? Your answer will depend not just on scientific evidence, but on your broader worldview about whether the universe is purely material or whether there exists a transcendent reality that can intervene in natural processes. And perhaps that's the real lesson here. The NASA story became popular because we wanted a shortcut. We wanted science to settle the theological question for us. But the most profound questions about reality, about God, about the reliability of ancient testimony, about the possibility of miracles, these can't be settled by calculation alone. They require wisdom, discernment, humility, and ultimately a willingness to grapple with uncertainty while making commitments about what we believe to be true. The sun standing still for Joshua is either one of the most remarkable events in human history, or it is an ancient story that shouldn't be read as literal history. Both positions can be held by intelligent, thoughtful people. What we can't do is pretend the question is simple, or that science has definitively answered it one way or the other. We've journeyed from ancient battlefields to modern space programs, from biblical text to scientific investigation, asking whether one of Scripture's most dramatic miracles might be detectable by contemporary astronomy. The truth, as we've discovered, is complex and perhaps less conclusive than either skeptics or believers would prefer. But that's often how truth works. It requires patient investigation, intellectual honesty, and humility about the limits of what we can know with certainty. If this deep dive challenged your thinking or gave you new perspectives, subscribe to this channel so you never miss our investigations into where faith, history, and science intersect. Hit that notification bell and drop a comment telling me what you think are miracles possible. In a scientific age, our next investigation explores another mysterious biblical account that sparked scientific debate. Until then, keep questioning, keep seeking, and keep your mind open to evidence wherever it leads.